Hi Year 9, welcome to your first history lesson with me, Miss Thika. So over the next 5 weeks or so, you're going to get one YouTube lesson a week from me. I style these very similar to the lessons that we would have done in school, if we were still in school. So hopefully you're able to see my PowerPoint on the screen, and I'll click my way through it. And I might ask you to pause me at certain sections to complete an activity or to maybe watch a YouTube video. And if I need to, I might also send you maybe some worksheets or some information via email if you're not able to see it on the YouTube video clearly. So you need something to write on, so go and get yourself a book or some lined paper and get your title down for today. So this is lesson 1, what problems did Germany face after World War I? So today we're going to be thinking about the issues that Germany had to overcome immediately after World War I and just before the agreement of the armistice as well. And we're also going to be thinking about which problems were the greatest that she faced, and you're going to watch a short YouTube video as well. So date and title down for me, please. The first thing I would like you to do, and I tried to embed this into this PowerPoint, but it didn't work. So you're going to have to go off and find it yourself, but it shouldn't be too difficult. The first thing I'd like you to do is watch this short YouTube clip. It's just under 4 minutes long. If you type into YouTube this here, Spartacist Uprising 1919, it should be the very first video that comes up, and it looks like this, and you should see that it's just under 4 minutes long, and you know you've got the right one. So what I want you to do is I want you to watch this clip, and then on your lined paper underneath your title, bullet point, what was life like for Germans, really. I should add that in there. What was life like for the people of Germany after the war, and then that's sort of the first part of the video clip. And then once you have bullet pointed that down, I then want you to consider what do you think was the greatest problem faced by Germany after World War I. So pause me now, find this YouTube video, watch it, and then complete those 2 activities for me, please. So hopefully you were able to see from the video that it wasn't just political issues that Germany was plagued with after World War I. Germany was left in a big mess after the war. You saw at the start of the video clip, hopefully, a lot of disease, a lot of famine, children in extreme poverty, issues with distributions of food, jobs, and recruitment was massively on the low as well, which meant that people really struggled to get a regular income. And then later down in the clip, hopefully you were able to identify as well that along with the social and financial issues that plagued Germany, there were also a lot of political problems as well. So lots of different radical political groups decided that now was their opportunity, that if they were going to seize the moment, now was that moment, that Germany was in turmoil and it needed a new leader. So we see the rise of different radical groups on the different sides of the political spectrum, which we'll look at next lesson, really sort of scrambling for power. So we see fights, violence break out in the street, just gunfights and murder and death just during the day. It was quite a regular occurrence to see people walking through the street. They were armed. A lot of soldiers who had been equipped with weaponry during World War I had kept that weaponry, which meant that average people in Germany now found themselves sort of immunised. They had weaponry, so fights often became extremely violent and resulted in sort of battles and gunfire. So there was an awful lot of unhappiness during this time period. So, not doing this bit just yet, cancel that. The first thing that I want you to do, please, is I'm going to put this on the PowerPoint, but if you can't see it very well, I'm also going to send this sheet to you in an email form as well. So you'll have 6 sources of information to read through, and I'm going to read through them with you in a second. Then I would like you to, normally we would colour code these, but obviously unless you can print this sheet off, which most of you won't be able to do that. So instead you'll have to give each source a number, and then you'll have to record as to what source is linked to which problem. So does the source mention social problems, political problems, or economic problems? So if we're thinking about social, that's anything that affects ordinary people, so perhaps disease, famine, high unemployment, poor living conditions. Political is anything to do with the power within Germany, people that are vying for power, or the government. And economic factors is anything that affects money. So again, that could also link to wages. So some of the sources might link to more than one factor. So don't just look at one box and read one sentence of it and then automatically decide that that's just social, because actually the different sentences within one box might actually link to different factors. So either do this via listening to me talk through it, or as I've said, I have sent you this sheet via email, and if you can't really see this, because sometimes the YouTube videos can be a little bit blurry, if you can't see this on my PowerPoint slide now, then just use that. So I'm going to read you through it all so you know what all of the key terms mean. Then I want you to pause me, and I want you to gather down different bits of information to show that there were social issues in Germany, there were political issues in Germany, and economic issues as well. So we'll start off in this top box here. Remember, each different point can be linked to a different factor. They're not all the same just because it's in one box. The new German government signed a 30-day armistice in November 1918. The key terms of this armistice were: the Alsace Lorraine and invaded lands would be evacuated by Germany, the west bank of the Rhine to be occupied by Allies and German troops to evacuate the east bank, most of the German fleet and many armaments and transport equipment was to be handed over. Germany, but not the Allies, was to hand over prisoners of war. Then we see several treaties being renounced. If something's renounced, that means it's being cancelled, it's being taken back. And Allied naval blockade was to remain. So I'm just going to talk you through a few of these because some of the words might be a little bit tricky. If we go right back at the top here, this should ring a bell because we spent a lot of year 9 thinking about the outbreak of World War I and why there was a lot of tension between the great European powers in the build-up to World War I. So Alsace-Lorraine should be an area that you are familiar with. If you have forgotten, Alsace-Lorraine was land that was squabbled over between France and Germany. Germany had taken Alsace-Lorraine from France after the Franco-Prussian War, and France was very bitter about that. They were desperate to regain this land from Germany. So you can see here that Alsace-Lorraine and other invaded lands had to be evacuated by Germany. So Germans are forced out of Alsace-Lorraine. The west bank of the Rhine was to be occupied by Allies. When it talks about Allies, it doesn't mean Germans. Germans were not the Allies. The Allied troops are Britain, France, and also parts of Russian soldiers as well. So they are able to invade certain parts of Germany and to occupy it. And the Rhine was of particular interest to the Allies as well, because areas within the Rhine were good for industry. So the Allied troops were able to occupy areas of the Rhine and use the natural resources and the industry for themselves. When it talks about the German fleet, it means the German navy and armaments as well as like military equipment. It says that has to be handed over. So it means that they actually have to surrender their military equipment to the Allies. you can probably imagine why one of the first things they know is the German fleet. If you think back to the start of Year 9, when we were looking about the build up to World War One, there was massive arms race between Great Britain and Germany in terms of who would have the largest and most superior navy in the world. And Britain was very paranoid about the fact that Germany seemed to be militarising at a much quicker rate, and Germany was trying to build up her navy so that it could compete with Britain. So Germany had to surrender some her fleet, but some members of the military took matters into their own hands and actually sank their own ships rather than surrender them to the Allies. Other equipment as well and transport, that all had to be handed over. Germany had to hand over prisoners of war, so any sort of British or French or any Allied soldier that had been captured by the Germans, they had to be freed, but not the other way around. So if Britain or France had any German prisoners of war, they had to stay in prison. So again, you can see how that's quite unfair. And this part here, because this links into some of the problems that come a little bit later, a naval blockade. A blockade is where effectively you seal a country in so that no supplies can get to it. So within Germany, particularly towards the end of World War One, we see the Allies forcing a naval blockade, which means that Germany was cut off from the rest of Europe, so that a lot of food couldn't get to them, a lot of medical equipment wasn't able to get within the country as well. They were effectively starving people from within inside the country. And even though the armistice, the ceasefire, has been agreed and World War One is over, that blockade continues. So people really started to struggle for lack of food and other medical equipment even after the war was over. So go through this and section off the information to decide whether it links to social, political or economic. Next one, political developments during war. And there's a little bit of a timeline down the side here. 1914, most Germans rallied to nation, but by 1917, unity was breaking. 1916, increasing military control of the government and growing criticism of the war. 1917, radicals opposed to war formed the USPD, which stands for the Independent Socialist Party. July, the Reichstag votes for peace, and September, the Fatherland Party was founded by nationalists who wanted Germany to make a peace of victory with land conquests in the west, east and overseas. So you can see here that if we go to 1914, which was obviously the start of World War One, it says most Germans rallied to nation. That means that there was a lot of patriotic feeling within Germany. A lot of people felt that it was their duty to fight for Germany on behalf of their country. In a sense, they supported the war. They thought it was a good thing. But by the time we get into 1917, which is the year before the end of World War One, unity was breaking down. People were no longer radically supporting the country or the war effort anymore. A lot of people wanted it to be over. And by 1916, increasing military control of the government, and there was growing criticism of the war. I think it had become apparent to a lot of Germans by the time we get into sort of 1916-17 that the war was almost a lost cause, and they wanted it to be over. Then, by the time we get into April, July, September of 1917, we see a lot of radical extremist parties being formed within Germany, such as the Independent Socialist Party, the Fatherland Party, who are wanting to push Germany's needs more. So, for example, here, where it says September, the Fatherland Party wanted peace of victory with land conquest, so they're still wanting to gain more land even after war. So decide which category that information's links to. Next one, living conditions. Real earnings fell between 20 and 30%. Meat consumption fell to 12% of pre-war level. 1917, and I'm hoping this will ring a bell because you might maybe have done some bits like this in some of your homework booklets recently. 1917 winter was called the turnip winter. It was a particularly hard winter in terms of agriculture, and really most people just survived on turnips. It was literally the only food that a lot of people could gain access to. There was major food and fuel shortages. We see that disease is rife. Thousands were dying each day from major flu epidemics. Let's face it, we all know what that feels like at the moment. But they were also dying from starvation. So I suppose if you wanted to compare this with the epidemic that we're facing today, a lot of us are more equipped to deal with major bouts of flu because generally we are healthy, whereas if you think about the conditions within Germany towards the end of World War One, a lot of people were already quite poorly anyway, through starvation and other diseases, so then if you were to get a bad bout of flu, that would kill you. And also deaths from starvation and hypothermia as well, you can see were quite high here. Appalling numbers. In 1916 it was 121,000, and by 1918 it was 293,000 deaths from starvation and hypothermia alone. Big numbers. Next box down here, the cost of war, and this is in the millions. Cost of war in terms of war dead, 2 million killed, 6.3 million injured, and then the total cost of war in the millions as well, 8.394. Top here, economy and finance. Between 1913 and 1918, the mark, which if you remember, that was the name of their currency, so that's their equivalent to our pound. The mark lost 75% of its value. Industry made vast profits, which were increasingly resented by ordinary Germans. The main reason why industry was making vast profits during this time is because some industries are actually able to benefit from war financially. If you're able to make the equipment that is needed during war times, you would often find the government would invest large amounts of money in particular industry, and that upset ordinary people who were really struggling, and it seemed to create a wider gap between the rich and the poor. Agricultural production fell, so farmers were starting to struggle. In December 1916, the auxiliary labour law gave the government harsh powers over labour, so it was gave sort of special war powers to the government to push for harder working conditions for people in terms of labour. War financed by printing money and borrowing, which led to inflation. We'll do a separate lesson on this, but inflation is normal. Don't get it mixed up with hyperinflation, which we'll do a little bit later down the line. Inflation is normal. That is where the cost of everyday goods goes up and up over time, but hyperinflation is where the cost of ordinary goods spirals out of control. But we see an increase in inflation during this time due to the war debt, because the German government had borrowed so much money to finance the war. Expectations of booty from victory as well. So things like if you invade particular countries during war, then things like looting, pillaging, taking resources is kind of a part of that. And not a lot of that really had occurred for Germany, so it struggled in that respect. Only 16% of the costs of war was met from taxation as well, so again Germany struggling in terms of debt and finances. And the last one here, I'm not going to talk you through that one, hopefully you can see it. If not, use the sheet that I've sent you. You can see that it is a map here. Got Germany and Luxembourg here, and then Belgium and Holland. And if you can remember from the lessons that we did in the build up to World War One, the Schlieffen Plan, allowed Germany to, well, the plan was to swoop through Belgium and into France in a lightning attack, but obviously that didn't work, and we see the introduction of trench warfare, which slowed the fighting down. So have a look at that map there and see if you can link any of those images to some of the problems that we've talked about. Okay, last thing from me. What I would like you to do is, I would like you to reach a judgment. What do you think was the greatest problem that Germany suffered after World War One? Do you think that the social problems were the greatest? Do you think the political problems were the greatest, or the financial problems? You need to be able to justify and expand your idea, so don't just put social, full stop. You need to be able to give 2 or 3 specific examples to support that point, and then, if you want to, a little additional challenge question. What is political turmoil, and why do you think Germany was suffering from this after World War One? Now, what you can do is, sorry, I always get a sore throat when I do these. If you would like to type up your judgment and then send it to me via email if you want me to mark it and give you some ideas as to anything extra you could have included in that, then obviously feel free. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to write it down and keep it for yourself, then of course that's totally fine. So thank you for listening for today's lesson, and I'll speak to you again shortly.